Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, glad you're back on the Investigative Journal on this Thursday. The week's coming to a quick end, and boy, we have a lot to cover today. You know, I'm a pretty simple guy. I like to do things quick and easy. I know a lot of people spend their time, their whole day or life studying the New Testament. Nothing wrong with it, but today I'm going to give you the whole New Testament in 5 minutes. That's right. But first, I'm going to also give you an update on the toxic green algae crisis in South Florida. And if you think this isn't important, then think again. Now, I had the opportunity to look into the same type of algae bloom. This is a cyanobacteria bloom in a body of water that creates havoc with the natural marine life, as well as causing toxic environmental conditions for human beings, even to the point where they can get respiratory illnesses from breathing near these algae breakouts. And one in Florida is going on right now, and it's huge. And when I was looking at the first one that I talked about in 2009 in Lake Atitlan in Guatemala, if you don't know where that's at, Google it. Beautiful volcanic lake up in the mountains in Guatemala, surrounded by several cities. And up in the mountains they had, farmland, and they would also use pesticides, things like that. And the sewerage would go right into the lake as far as the pesticides, and it created this huge problem. Still to this day, it hasn't been fixed. And what it would take would be revamping their sewerage system, which the government apparently doesn't think is important, as well as making sure that the pesticides are used in are non-toxic, that don't run off into the lake. So, what do we have in Florida? Well, I explained it a couple days ago, but I want to play this little 7-minute clip that does a pretty good job of telling you the damage and the importance of correcting this quickly in South Florida. Here we go.
Folks, Kayak DIY here, and today I wanted to bring issue to the forefront here and use the channel to hopefully bring to light this issue. I'm sitting in front of Cape Coral Yacht Club. This is a popular area. It's actually not too far from my house, and the river that you see behind me is literally just minutes away from the open Gulf Ocean. And this river runs all the way up to the center of the state, where it gets water from Lake Okeechobee, which is a water reservoir that was created many years back. And I believe it was created in order to dry up some of the Everglades so that they could make farmland for like sugar crops and have residential and commercial areas. And that has led to some devastation. For one, not just humans, but also wildlife. This here is just from yesterday. When I actually filmed a lot of this stuff, I didn't film the manatee, but when I filmed a lot of this stuff, it was actually mild. It wasn't even bad. It actually is much worse than this. There's dead fish on the beach. We got these blue-green algae blooms, which are toxic. They're very toxic. What we have found is, according to what many researchers and scientists are saying, and the data says that 10,000 cells per liter can actually cause respiratory issues. Rick Bartleson, a local water expert in the area, said that our counts in the area were as high as 20 million cells per liter. And it's just not respiratory issues. If you're in the water, if you ingest this, it will cause nausea, vomiting. They have actually had supposedly issues locally. A veterinarian supposedly said that they had a large amount of dogs coming in that had elevated liver counts. So this was affecting possibly the livers, and the vet actually asked the owner, do you live on a canal? So this is becoming a pretty big issue here. Some latest research too, they're saying that prolonged exposure to breathing in these algae blooms could cause possibly Parkinson's and Lou Gehrig's disease. I don't know how much I believe that, if that could be sensationalized or not, but that's what we're hearing. And what we're seeing is, yes, this is definitely toxic. So here's a look at ABC 7 News. They're going to talk a little bit about it. You can find this actually on their website. I'll have it linked in the video description below as well. But we had the Army Corps of Engineers actually speak here in Cape Coral, and just feet away were dead manatees right on the loading ramp area. And I couldn't help but seem to think that the Army Corps of Engineers were kind of downplaying the severity of the issue.
Today, people question the Army Corps of Engineers in Cape Coral demanding answers about algae, although the department actually responsible for that didn't show for the meeting.
And still at least 300 people packed the Cape Coral Yacht Club to hear from the Corps about Lake Okeechobee water releases and the toxic impacts. To add fuel to the fire, during the meeting, just behind the Yacht Club's marina, this dead manatee, and one that's alive still, was found floating. Video circulating all over social media today.
It was powerful and it was timely. Tonight, ABC 7 Simone Cucurullo is getting you more because she talked to people who were right there as all of this was happening. They saw it firsthand. Simone.
Jeff, Krista, many people were filming and taking pictures, and one guy I talked to even Facebook Lived the entire thing. Our cameras were also there as FWC came and tied the dead manatee up and took it away. But it just made things even more tense.
I definitely got emotional. I was crying and angry. I'm very angry.
Emotions running high.
But it was just a really sad thing to watch.
As people like Sarah Fredrickson gathered to helplessly watch this dead manatee.
These huge, enormous, beautiful creatures are washing up on our beaches, and this is their world, and we're just ruining it for them.
Sarah and her boyfriend Dave were trying to get into the packed U.S. Army Corps of Engineers meeting in the Cape.
All of this area was just the 4 other male manatees just, swimming around her.
When they saw the dead sea cow and started recording.
We moved down here, to be in paradise like anyone else. It's, it's Southwest Florida. It's supposed to be beautiful.
But this site is anything but beautiful. Watch as FWC crews tie the manatee with rope and take it away for testing.
I think that is extremely devastating.
I'm disgusted. I am absolutely disgusted and angry.
FWC confirmed for us tonight that the manatee is undergoing a necropsy to figure out how and why it died.
They're living this 24/7. They're swallowing it. They're eating. It's like they're going to die.
But if you ask people like Dave and Sarah, the proof is in the water.
People are just kind of brushing it off as being natural and normal and usual, and this is not normal.
Tonight I asked FWC to explain to me exactly why this is happening and how it can be prevented. Crews could not do an on-camera interview, and I've yet to hear back from their research team. But as soon as the results from the necropsy are in, we'll bring them to you both on air and online. Live in the studio tonight, Simone Cucurullo, ABC 7.
And we
declared a state of emergency in 7 Florida counties to combat the algae bloom caused by water discharges from Lake Okeechobee. The order covers Palm Beach, Martin, St. Lucie, Glades, Hendry, Lee, and Okeechobee counties. Scott criticized the federal government, saying the Army Corps has been too slow in completing Everglades restoration projects. But environmentalists countered that Scott has cut the DEP's budget and said his policies haven't improved water quality. Residents on both coasts of Florida blame polluted water releases from the lake for what has become an annual summer outbreak of toxic algae blooms in the rivers.
So this is Kayak DIY signing out, and hopefully you guys found this video somewhat informative if you didn't know about the situation that we're facing down here. Please share this with other people, share it on social media. Hopefully we get enough of the word out that our politicians have a feeling of accountability and do something about it, because this just can't be happening. Manatees, wildlife, they don't read signs, and this has gone too far.
Well, and it's not going to get better if they don't do something, and I've seen this before go on in Lake Atitlan in Guatemala, and unless this is dealt with, and you correct the problems up in Lake Okeechobee and the runoff, which the Army Corps of Engineers ruined, I believe, because they created a runoff going to the oceans instead of allowing it to flow into the Everglades, which would have minimized the problem. But as we can see, we're going to have to deal with it, and we'll move on. Okay, today I'm just doing some quick segments, and I decided to give you the Old Testament in 5 minutes. In case you're too busy and you've got too many things to do in your life, at least you'll know what the whole New Testament was about in 5 minutes.
In the beginning, God created the universe and a planet called Earth. Humans were formed in God's image to continue God's work.
Okay, I'm going to correct that. Maybe he created a flat surface, not a planet, not a sphere.
But soon, humans decided we want to live our way, not God's. Selfishness and violence filled the world, so God started over with just one family. And God made a covenant with a man named Abraham. The land around you is now yours. Your family will be my blessing to the entire world. In just a few generations, they grew into a large nation named Israel. The Egyptians became fearful and forced the Israelites to be their slaves. Through a humble leader named Moses, God led the Israelites in a great exodus back toward their promised land. Along the journey, God gave laws and commands to help the Israelites follow God's ways. Finally, after 40 years of struggle and complaining in the desert, the Israelites arrived back home in the promised land. In victory, the people worshipped God, but soon after, they turned from God and lived their own rebellious ways. This became a pattern from generation to generation. Israel's greatest judge was Samuel. He followed God's ways and spoke for God as a prophet. He told Israel that God was the only king they ever needed. But they desired to be like the corrupt nations surrounding them and insisted, "We want a human king who we can see to rule over us just like the other nations." So Samuel found a man named Saul to be Israel's first king. His reign began well, but before long, Saul stopped following God's ways and made many bad decisions. So Samuel told Saul, "Because you have turned your back on God, God has rejected you as a king." Samuel's search for the next king led to a courageous young shepherd boy named David. When David grew up to be king, God blessed him and the Israelites greatly. But David was not perfect. He had an affair with a married woman and committed a murder to cover it up. But deep inside, David always loved God and would return to living in God's ways. Known as the poet warrior, he wrote music to God called psalms, heartfelt expressions of prayer, struggle, and thankfulness. After many years as king, David gave the throne to his son Solomon. God also told David, "One day, one of your descendants will rule with a kingdom that will never end." Solomon succeeded his father David, becoming the richest king in Israel's history. Full of God's wisdom, Solomon wrote books like Proverbs and built a magnificent temple, a permanent tabernacle reminding people of God's continual presence. But Solomon strayed from God, marrying corrupt wives who led him into worshiping false gods. Civil war broke out, dividing the country into a northern kingdom called Israel and a southern kingdom called Judah. Soon, both of these kingdoms were led by corrupt kings who ignored God's ways. During this time, prophets were sent as messengers, calling the Israelites to return to God. They warned of the destructive consequences ahead. The prophet Elijah, a wild and rugged man, showed up false prophets by calling on God to give an awesome display of fire. The prophet Elisha followed him, bringing a boy back to life by causing him to sneeze. These prophets challenged the Israelites and their kings to return to God's better ways. But the Israelites would not listen. Distracted in their own rebellion, other nations swept in and conquered both of the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. God's people were forced out of the promised land, and many were taken away to be slaves once again. The temple was destroyed, and the people lost everything. This was a time called the exile, where many of the Israelites, now called Jews, were scattered across different lands. One prophet named Daniel was sent to a city named Babylon. The law demanded that everyone pray only to the king of Babylon, but Daniel refused and prayed to God 3 times a day. So Daniel was thrown into a pit of hungry lions. But God closed the mouths of the lions, and Daniel emerged the next morning without a scratch. Though scattered, God was still watching over the Jewish people, and God gave them hope, speaking through the prophet Jeremiah's words. I'll make a new covenant with the people of Israel, returning them to the promised land and filling their hearts and minds with my ways. 60 years later, this hope was realized. The Persian Empire freed the Jewish people to return to their promised land. A small number gathered back in the capital city of Jerusalem, and a new, smaller temple was built under the leadership of Ezra. Reunited, they celebrated and shouted with joy. But the elders wept in remembrance of what was lost. Prophets like Malachi and Isaiah pointed to the future and a coming king, a Messiah, one who would fully restore Israel and bring a new kingdom of peace. So the Jewish people waited and hoped, and God would not speak through the prophets again for 400 years.
Okay, that's a long time, and the reason I did that was because I realized how busy people are. And a lot of times I talk to some people and they say, oh, I never read the Old Testament, I just don't have time. So there you have it. Just listen to this, 5 minutes, 39 seconds. This was done by a guy by the name of Dan Haidt, Haidt, H-A-I-T. It has 1.990605 views, almost 2 million views. And there you go. If you're too busy, now you don't need to read the Old Testament. There you have it. Okay, what about the New Testament? New Testament in 5 minutes. I'm sure I can find something on that. And then when you meet your Maker, you can say, yeah, I know everything I need to know about the New Testament and the Old Testament because I lived in the 21st century, and that's how we do business these days. So there you have it. Now all we need to do is the New Testament, and you're covered. You can continue doing all the crazy things you do in your life, make excuses, do all these things. I don't want to have time to do this because today I have to go out and garden. Or today I have to go out and have coffee all day. Today I have to go out and walk by the ocean. Today I have to go out and work a meaningless job that I've been doing for 30 years just to survive in America. And I don't have time for this other stuff. Or today, I have to go to Disneyland. Today, I have to watch a movie. Today, I have to watch a meaningless series on TV that they put on Netflix that wastes most of your time. And by the way, I'm guilty of all these things. That's why I played this 5 minutes, because I don't want to be caught off guard, because when I go to meet my Maker, and he asks me, did you read the Old Testament? I'm going to say, yes, I know everything about the Old Testament, and that will not be a lie, because I was told here that everything you need to know about the New Old Testament is right here, and in fact, what more do you need to know when it says this is a brilliant and very quick review of the Old Testament, and what's most shocking is the accurate depiction of the fall of Israel and its people due to the disobedience to God. So there you have it. Now, you know what I always think about, and maybe I'll ask him this question if I ever meet my Maker. I'm going to say, now wait a minute. How come it's just the Old and the New? That's a real Old Testament. How about the Ancient Testament? Then we can turn the New Testament into the Old Testament, and why don't we write a new one? I mean, it's been 2,000 years, and everybody that I talk to in the Christian community loves this book, but how come it hasn't been updated? So, I mean, is that a simple question? And people are going, Greg, you can't ask God that. That's why not? I mean, I can't understand why something else hasn't been written in the last 2,000 years. Now, let's... I did meet someone named Anthony Burgess. Remember the guy who wrote Clockwork Orange? And Anthony's no longer with us, but Anthony, I met him doing an interview when I was a journalist in Rome, and he was a scholar not only on certain historical aspects of life, but he was a linguist and spoke over 13 languages. Amazing man. I had the chance to spend an afternoon with him, and I'll be honest, how we spent it was very interesting, and I'll get into that in a minute. But I met Anthony, and I wanted to interview him because of Clockwork Orange and the story behind that, which had to do with the Rolling Stones, and an incredible story of how he hated Hollywood, and I thought it'd make a good piece, which I did publish it. Somewhere got published in French, I believe. They translated it. And it was an interesting story, and I met him at a translation conference. And I wanted to go there because I was learning a new language, and it was fascinating to meet people who mastered 10 languages. I can't even master English. These are incredible people, and Anthony was one. And the whole idea of the conference, and we'll get to this in the second half hour, it's kind of a show we're doing just to pass the time away, so to speak, so we don't have to read the whole Old Testament, right? I've already done it in 5 minutes, so why read it? Right? So I'm at this translation convention in Rome, and really it was a discussion between two groups. One, traditional linguists who believed that literal translation was the best way to understand a people and their culture. So they were translating most words literally because they said it's impossible to really understand a culture because of the inflection, because of, you know how it is. You can say things in English that don't seem to translate into Italian or Spanish very well. And you even change the meaning. Then there was Anthony Burgess and his group who said that you have to go beyond literal translation and actually dig into the culture and live there and experience it with people before you can really translate properly, because a lot of literal translations do not reflect the actuality, the actual meaning behind what this culture was talking about. And so it was very interesting because both, I believed, had their merits, because it's difficult. I mean, here's a guy that spoke 13 languages, and how much time do you have in this world to dig into these cultures? But he said, when I asked him that question at the conference, before we went back to his villa to do the interview regarding Clockwork Orange, and he said this, you have to rely on other scholars from those countries and then dig into it together. And basically they were doing translations of books with several people to come to a better understanding of a book, a literary book, translated from one language to another, so that the reader in English coming from, let's say, Chinese, could get an idea of what this writer was talking about. And I had that experience because I used to want to read a lot of these Italian playwrights and writers, and I couldn't understand all of Italian, so I would read the English translations. And so I found it quite interesting that many times the words didn't really fit the meaning of what the writer was trying to say after I talked to some people in Italy. So back in 3 minutes on this, challenging linguistic show. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This isn't happening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal on this Thursday, and we were talking about, well, what were we talking about? Well, I was talking about an interview I did years and years ago with the author Anthony Burgess, who wrote Clockwork Orange, amongst a number of other things. And how did I get onto this rambling? I think it was because I mentioned that I was always curious when we talk about the Bible, why the Old Testament isn't called the Ancient Testament, the New Testament called the Old, and then writing a new one now in the last 2,000 years. But then I remembered Anthony Burgess did publish a book. He rewrote the Bible, and it's quite interesting. So he was thinking the same way I was. So he took it into his own hands. And at the time I interviewed him, I didn't ask him, Anthony, did you have a chat with God regarding this version? But good idea. He didn't entitle it the New Testament or anything. But anyway, so here I am interviewing him regarding, we're talking about languages, but the major part of the interview was regarding his, if you've ever seen Clockwork Orange, it has a really terrible ending. That's not the way evil triumphed over good, and he wrote it completely opposite, where good triumphed over evil. And at the time it was put into, I think Kubrick did this, right? He went to Hollywood and put up a stink. In fact, sued them for this, but I think he lost the case because what happened when he was in England, listen to this. He was a young writer, and you know, as things go, and some writers fall upon hard times when they were not known or they're just getting their career started. And so Anthony had already written Clockwork Orange and was working on some other books, as he told me. And by the way, it was a great afternoon. I mean, it wasn't like an interview in 10 minutes. We spent at least 4 or 5 hours sitting on his terrace in Rome. Picture this. Here I am with this guy who was extreme, you know, like, to me, it'd be like if you were a sports guy interviewing Babe Ruth. Well, maybe not Babe Ruth, but Lou Gehrig or something, a top baseball player if you're a sports writer, because in the intellectual world, this guy is a powerhouse. He was married to a Italian countess, and they had this beautiful villa in Rome, and then he had one up in Tuscany, etc., etc. So he did pretty well for himself. But Anthony, you know, I was young, stupid, and just dumb enough to get an interview like this, and, you know, allow myself to make a fool of myself, because he was in a league all of his own compared to me. I mean, he was in the latter part of his life, wisdom coming out every, you know, phrase he said in between the couple bottles of wine we finished. And I don't want to leave that out because we enjoyed ourselves. But anyway, he got into the story of what happened with Kubrick when they sued Hollywood over changing his ending, but then Hollywood relied on a contract that he did with the Rolling Stones, because as he was a fledgling writer, he sold Clockwork Orange for $5,000 to the Stones, to Mick Jagger. And so Mick Jagger basically owned the rights, and guess what? They made millions on this movie, and Anthony Burgess never got a dime from Mick Jagger. You know, you think the guy made billions of, you know, quadruple thousands and millions of dollars with the Rolling Stones. You think he would, you know, hey, here, Anthony, here's a couple $100,000 for writing the book that I made $1 million on, you know, or whatever. No, are you kidding me? He wouldn't even talk to him, he said, because Anthony Burgess was trying to show that the contract wasn't valid as well because it was done under duress. And then he said, you know what, I was just trying to make a point that I sued them just to say to Mick Jagger, make sure they change that ending the way I wrote the book. So I get screwed on writing the book and get only $5,000. Then they have the audacity, and you allow them to change the ending. So basically, he didn't like Hollywood too much, and he said he'd never go back there, and he never did, I guess. So anyway, that was my little meeting with him. And as we're doing little segments of things, something came across my desk, and everybody always talks about the Council of Nicaea. And to be honest with you, there's the Council of Verona, the Council of Trent. And I always wonder, what the hell happened at the Council of Nicaea? And I forget. You know, as many things you learn, you forget, right? What's that saying? I've forgotten more about this than you ever learned. And that saying's supposed to mean that I'm so smart and you're so dumb. But anyway, so I found this. I don't even know what it's going to say, so it could be completely wrong, but I guess it's a good place to start. So what the heck was the Council of Nicaea? I've forgotten. And this one has a lot of views. My God, 571,000. I looked at my video from yesterday, and it had 5. Was that a typo? Or are they controlling who goes to the website? Who goes to the YouTube? YouTube can do that, they say. They can also block you, right? I guess Alex Jones has been blocked, and that's a story. I read an article today. Some guy says, this whole world is going crazy, and if you believe that it was okay to block Alex Jones, you should just leave America. Well, anyway, I'd like to tell the guy that Alex Jones works with these people, and it's a setup. And the reason they're blocking him is so that the old truth community, who doesn't know jack you-know-what about this story, I think 99%, most people don't. Well, there's a few people that understand who Alex Jones is, but most people are going to be like that guy who says, oh, if they've blocked Alex Jones, we're never going to get the truth. Well, you ain't going to get the truth listening to him. You're going to get a lot of things, but he's going to take you down a dark road. And he works for the powers that be. He's a COINTEL writer and journalist. And he might not even be Alex Jones. He could be a guy by the name of Bill Hicks. Remember we talked about that yesterday? And how do I know? Well, I really don't, but I probably have a better idea than a lot of people because I used to have a radio show right after him for a while at Genesis, so I worked with these people back in the old days when there was only a few radio stations on the internet, and now it's like, wow, there's 25 million journalists out there, and you know what they say about that? Anyway, here we go. I forget what the heck the Council of Nicaea was. So here we go. Let's see. I don't even know if this is right. So you tell me. Go ahead. Here we go.
The Council of Nicaea. Before this occurred, there were several different competing views of Christ. Then the Emperor Constantine assembled them all together to decide on one view of Christ. They met for days, fighting and bickering, until finally the current view of Christianity won, and the divinity of Christ was declared. Then the new Orthodox view used its power to stomp out and erase all other competing views of Christianity. Or so we're told. You know, I hear this story a lot from atheists, cults, Muslims, and several other non-Christian groups. They always give me this generic story to try to show me that the Council of Nicaea made up the divinity of Jesus and created a new version of Christianity. However, this is all I ever hear, this generic story. I never get any more details from skeptics, and there's a good reason why. Because when we study the details of what happened before, during, and after the council met, this fable is easily debunked, and we see that Christ's divinity was not made up at the council. So let's start with events that led up to the council. On February 24th, in 303 AD, the worst persecution of Christians began under the Emperor Diocletian, and lasted until Emperor Galerius finally issued a general edict of tolerance in 311 AD. 2 years later, in 313 AD, with the Edict of Milan, the Emperor Constantine finally legalized Christianity and allowed its practice. Now I want to stop here and make sure this point is clear. Constantine did not make Christianity the official religion of the empire. He simply commanded official tolerance of Christianity. He did, however, outlaw Jews from stoning Christians and gladiator shows, although they did persist until the 5th century. It wasn't until 380 AD, under the Emperor Theodosius, that Christianity was left as the only legal religion. Shortly after Christianity was made legal, a pastor from Alexandria named Arius began preaching the idea that Jesus was not God, but a created being. He gained a following and began disputing with Alexander, the bishop of Alexandria. So in 321 AD, a local council declared Arius a heretic. However, Arius just moved to Palestine, where he gained a larger following, and over the course of the next few years, the debate became so intense that it gained the attention of Emperor Constantine. Constantine, who had just unified the empire, didn't want anything that would threaten division. He saw the debate between the Christians and Arians as a threat to the stability of the empire, so he moved to settle it. He officially called the council in 325 AD. There were no Gnostics involved, there were no Ebionites involved, or any other groups. The council was called to settle disputes between Christians and Arians only. Most other heretical views of Christianity, like Gnosticism, had mostly died out by this point, and the majority of those professing to be Christians were Orthodox Christians, so there was not a wide variety of different views at the council. Although Constantine originally invited over 1,800 bishops from across the empire, only around 300 were able to attend. Most of them were from the east, with only about a dozen representing the west. Now it should be remembered what happened to these men less than 2 decades ago. Most of them suffered through one of the greatest Christian persecutions of all time. Many of them faced brutal torture and imprisonment for their faith. So despite the modern view about the participants at the council, they were not the type of men who were fine with compromising their beliefs, especially if a few years earlier they were willing to die for them. These bishops actually assembled in Nicaea to confirm what they had already believed and deal with Arius' teachings. Now there were three parties at the council. The smallest was Arius and a handful of bishops that agreed with him, that the Father and Jesus were of different substance, or heterousios. The second, and much larger group, was the Orthodox group, led by Hoseas of Cordova and Alexander of Alexandria. Also in this group was the young deacon Athanasius. This group held the long-standing belief of the church that Jesus was fully God and had existed eternally with the Father. They said Jesus was of the same substance, or homoousios. Then there was a third group, roughly equal in size to the Orthodox group, called the Eusebian group, led by Eusebius of Caesarea. However, this group didn't differ on theology from the Orthodox view. They also believed Jesus was fully God and had existed eternally with the Father. They only differed on the use of the word homoousios. The reason is because in previous centuries, modalist heresies had used the word to teach that the Father and Jesus were one person and not coexisting persons of one being. So in actuality, the Orthodox group and the Eusebian group didn't differ on theology or the deity of Christ. They only differed on terminology. Now a big modern myth is that Emperor Constantine forced Trinitarian views on the church, but this simply is not historically supported. Although he presided over the council, he did not push any particular view. He was no theologian. All he wanted was that both sides would come to an agreement and there would be unity in the church. The Orthodox group listened to the views of Arius, and they overwhelmingly rejected his views as being new and distant from the view of the church. Eusebius writes that some of the bishops tore up letters containing Arius' teaching. He then writes that church leaders interrogated Arius using scripture, but found he had a new way of interpreting every piece of scripture. They then pointed out that his views had to be wrong, because it was new and it wasn't taught in any early church history. Athanasius rhetorically asked, "How many fathers can you cite for your phrases?" They then formed the Nicene Creed, which is a clear condemnation of Arius' teaching and a confirmation of the Orthodox view. In the end, all but Arius and two bishops signed the creed, clearly showing there was no major divisions in church theology. The council then moved to deal with other issues, such as which day to formally celebrate Easter. They formally denounced Gnosticism and other minor sects, publicized 20 canon laws, and dealt with other minor issues. The council did not decide on the biblical canon. The canon had evolved on its own over time. However, according to the Muratorian fragment, the canon was nearly complete by the end of the 2nd century. The council did not decide on the use of the word Trinity. It dealt primarily with the divinity of Christ. The word Trinity can be found in early Christian history as it was used by early church fathers. An acceptance of a divine three can also be found in other early Christian writings. Now, the results of the council did not actually please Constantine. In fact, he was very angry at the Christians. He wanted unity and compromise, not for one side to denounce the other. He actually took pity on the Arians. Arius was exiled and fled to Ilaria for a short time, while his heresy began to spread and gain political power, especially when on her deathbed, Constantine's sister urged Constantine to support Arius, and he actually did. Arius found a new crafty way of interpreting the Nicene Creed in his favor, and Constantine invited him back so he could force the church to readmit him. However, Arius died before this could happen. A follower of Arius, Eusebius of Nicaea, was able to sway Constantine more in favor of the Arian view. Just before his death, Eusebius of Nicaea baptized Constantine, effectively symbolizing his siding with the Arians. After Constantine's death, the Arians continued to gain more ground against the Orthodox view. The Arian bishops that Constantine had favored used their political power to fight against Christianity. Constantine was succeeded by two Arian emperors in the east who worked with Arian bishops in an attempt to override Nicaea and write a new creed. Although Arians were still in the minority, they were given much more political power, which they used to try to stamp out Christianity. Many Christian leaders were forced into subscribing to creeds that did not favor either side. Jerome later described this time period as when the whole world groaned and was astonished to find itself Arian. However, despite the power of the Arians, one bishop fought back almost completely by himself. Athanasius of Alexandria continued to argue from Scripture and stand against the might of the Arian heresy. Even when he was banished and removed from his position 5 times, he never swayed and stood for truth against the Arian political machine. He was a popular hero who prevented Christian theology from compromising and giving in to the Arians. So the Arians turned to gaining more political power. But just before the Arians completely consolidated their hold over the empire, they turned to internal fighting destroyed themselves. It wasn't long before all their political power was lost, and the Christians were able to meet in 381 AD at the Council of Constantinople and reaffirm the Nicene faith. The battle between the Arians and the Christians did not end there. After the Council of Nicaea, many Arian bishops headed north and began converting the Germanic tribes to Arianism. They then eventually conquered the Western Roman Empire, and the Christians had to deal with Arianism again. However, as we can see today, Arianism died out, and Christianity is still going strong and growing. So as you can see, Christian bishops did not inherit absolute political power from the Council of Nicaea and used it to stomp out other competing sects. On the contrary, it was the Arians who gained the political power and tried to stomp out the true church. So there is no evidence the Council created Christianity, the concept of the Trinity, or the divinity of Jesus, or used political power to erase other competing sects. This myth about the Council is a complete fairy tale. It astonishes me how many non-Christians use the Council of Nicaea to try to claim Christianity was made up in 325 AD, when historically there is just no evidence for it.
Okay, so there you have it. That's a lot to swallow, and a different view than you normally get, right? I guess. I'd forgotten basically a lot of the little things that went on at the Council of Nicaea. When it was going on, I was doing a film in another part of Italy at the time. Oh, wait a minute. Which council are we talking about? The Council of Nicaea. Greg, you weren't even born yet. It was the year 300. Okay. Sorry. But anyway, now to get serious on it, so really the idea is when you start going back in the history, there can be a lot of different views, because it's the farther you go back, the harder it is to really gather facts, and most things become circumstantial, and a lot of different theories. And so I use this not only as an example of how we are quick to just remember a couple things about a lot of things we learn, and it's good to go back and piece these things together again, because there's so much to learn that a lot of times you forget, right? So I'm glad we did that, because I want to go deeper now into what was going on during that period of time, since I wasn't there, And I had a thought the other day, what was the world like without me before I was born? I guess it was the same, except I was here now, I'm here now, and what's going to be like when I'm not here? Do you ever think about that for yourself? I guess it's just going to keep going and going and going. And my only regret is I can't spend more time here, right? I wish I could stay for the party, but I have to leave. Time is up. I'll see you tomorrow. Well, maybe I won't. So anyway, what am I going to finish here with? Okay, before I find something regarding Michelle Obama being a transgender, let me just recount one of the happiest moments of my life this week. Why not? We only got 4 or 5 minutes. I was sitting down watching the Cubs game, and they were playing... Who were they playing? God, I forgot. It's been 3 days, and I forgot who they were playing. Well, anyway, they were... isn't that terrible? I know they're playing the Brewers right now. So who were they playing before that? I forgot. But anyway, they were losing 3-0, okay? And they hadn't got a hit. It's coming to me who they played. And they hadn't had a hit. They had 2 hits going into the 9th. And you think, oh boy, this whole game's over. And guess what happens? One guy gets on base with an easy ground ball to second that should have been played, and then 2 batters get hit. So you got 2 hits batsmen. A guy gets on base on a ball that should have been played. There's 2 outs, 2 strikes. A rookie comes up named David Bote, B-O-T-E, and with 2 strikes and 2 outs, he hits a grand slam. They win the game 4-3. Oh, it's not a fair world, is it? Baseball gods are not fair. But anyway, it was probably the most, and I let up this big, huge scream. The dogs were like, whoa, what's wrong with him? And it was a happy day for me, and it was probably the best, the most honest, happy scream I let out in a long time. And the last one was when the Cubs won the World Series in 2016. As you know, I'm from Chicago, and had gone through many years of losing. It did affect my ego, it affected my personality. And because we were always losers in Chicago, and I was a baseball fan, I always considered myself a loser. So the Cubs weren't helping my self-esteem. And when we won the World Series in 2016, I said, now I'm a champion. You see how the world can change? And when David Bote hit that home run, I said, here we go again. Well, anyway, I just checked out. The Cubs are winning right now 8-4. And I think if I wasn't a meteorologist, if I can't be a meteorologist in my next lifetime, I would love to be a baseball announcer. I think I'd be pretty good at it. I practice a lot of times on my own, and I'd love to do it. It's a fantastic, I love the game, and it'd be a great way to spend this world. And then when I died and I met my maker, I could also say, yes, I spent most of my time thinking and playing baseball and watching it, but I know everything about the Old Testament. And he'd say, you do? I'd say, well, yeah, there's a 5-minute video that tells me everything, and I lived in 2018, and everything is quick here now. And how come the Old Testament is, Greg, you've already went through that, the ancient and the new one, you want a new one. How often do you want a new one? Every 200 years, 300 years, or every 1,000 years, every 2,000 years? Boy, do I have a lot of questions to ask my maker when that day comes, if I get the chance to. And you know what? Some people will tell me there isn't one. So this is a confusing world we live in. I wish everybody believed the same thing. Wouldn't it be easy? No doubts. And I'd have more time to concentrate on the important things in life, like whether I could be a meteorologist or a baseball announcer. And hope you enjoyed the show. We'll get back to the Jesuits and all of their intrigue on more editions of the Investigative Journal. But today I wanted to go over a few things quickly, because as you know, we live in a fast-paced world and don't have time for the serious things in life, do we? No. But I'll have time tomorrow to come back to the Investigative Journal. See you tomorrow here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You're listening to the Investigative Journal. Go to GregAnthony'sJournal.wordpress.com. Get shows going back over a decade regarding the Vatican-led New World Order. See you tomorrow.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.